but I'm ready to move on because last week I let you guys know that we have a new dedicated email for the podcast for you to send questions and topics to. And we got a couple of great emails. But for those of you who are unaware, we got the fanboy podcast at gmail.com. You can't forget it. Easy to remember. The fanboy podcast at gmail.com. So, a couple of the questions that came in, we're going to start with the one that comes from Mr. J Smart. So, Jay Smart sent in a question about Man of Steel versus the Batman. And here's what he had to say. First of all, he says, "Hey, a big fan. We're quite similar in our love for Superman and our utter disappointment in how WB isn't doing anything with Supes on film." Yes, if that's how you feel, we definitely have that in common. I was not as big a fan of the Batman as you. I saw many holes in the plot and the predictability as well. Odd dialogue, writing points. I liked it, did not love it, but here's my question. Thanks for letting me know what you thought of the Batman there, Jay. He said Man of Steel made roughly 128 million on its opening weekend back in 2013, and the Batman has earned a similar figure. And then he wrote this when it was around 128. Then it kept getting revised upward. I think it ended up somewhere in the mid 130s, like 134, 135. But then he said both were similar in production cost. Why was Warner so afraid to move forward with Superman? I remember back in 13, the talk was that Superman needed to make $1 billion for a sequel to be considered. The Batman has already got one. I mean, mind you, though, they haven't officially announced a sequel. We all know it's coming, but there hasn't been. Sometimes there is that press release a week after the big opening weekend where they'll say Matt Reeves is coming back for part 2. They haven't done that yet, but you're right, Jay. We do know it's coming. He said, "I know Man of Steel's ending upset some. Some claimed it was too dark. Same for the joyless BVS. Is this just plain disrespect of Superman since it's not just about the money? Not much joy in the Batman. Also, I'm a wrestling fan, diehard Bret Hart fan from long ago. Sincerely, Jay Smart." Bret Hart, the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. I will talk about him when I launch the Wrestling Fanboy soon. More details some other time. But okay, let's talk about your question here. So, while it's certainly true that Man of Steel and the Batman opened to similar figures, and by the way, it's even true that they cost very similar figures, because that's something that we haven't discussed here on the show, Brett. Remember, like 3 weeks ago, we spent a few minutes discussing these rumors that the film only cost $100 million, and there were people saying like, "Oh, like Warner Brothers went cheap on this Batman movie or whatever." We ended up. It has since come out that Warner Brothers actually spent $200 million making this movie, and what's interesting about that is I don't think it was intended to be that high. A lot of it was inadvertent costs. Remember, they had a couple of big delays because of COVID. They also had a thing where Robert Pattinson himself got COVID shortly after they returned. The production almost seemed a bit like snake bit from afar there for a little while. That's why it's great that the movie turned out as great as it did, and that teaser they were able to use with just footage shot in like what they were able to film before getting shut down, know. So the movie worked out wonderfully, but there were some production bumps along the way that I believe caused the budget to go much, much higher. But what's interesting is this is a Batman movie, right? In sequels, they're not going to have to reconstruct all these sets again. They've already established the world, and I imagine the budgets are going to drop down to something much closer to like 100 million, because Batman movies shouldn't be costing you north of 200, especially in this day and age with technology, like the way they shoot The Mandalorian and all the other stuff. Like, there's no way studios should be dropping that much money about a hero that doesn't even have superpowers and is supposed to be super grounded, right? Whereas Man of Steel cost 225 mil, and any decent sequel is going to have to cost around that, just because a Superman movie requires a ton of effects and requires villains that are much larger than life because you're dealing with a demigod. So the price tag on a Superman franchise is just inherently going to be, it's going to be apples and oranges. They're going to be two different price points on these franchises. That's why it's hard to compare their opening weekends, because we could even go back to an older generation, to the previous set of reboots. Both Batman Begins and Superman Returns opened and ended up with very similar box office numbers. Yet, the Batman Begins movie led to the whole Dark Knight trilogy. It got a sequel, whereas Superman Returns, that never happened, even though they were actually, in terms of box office, really rather close. So this isn't the first time that Batman seems to be getting the go-ahead when Superman is still stalling out. But honestly, I don't think it has to do with the joy thing. I think with Man of Steel, it was all about the expectations at the time. You got to understand, Warner Brothers was looking at what Marvel and Disney were doing on the other side of the fence there with their Marvel films. Man of Steel came out in 2013. That's 5 years after Iron Man came out. And that's 1 year after the first Avengers movie came out and made, $2 billion. And all of a sudden, Marvel is the hottest thing in Hollywood, if not the world, right? So now Warner Brothers, they're coming in hot though too, because they've got Christopher Nolan, who just gave us back-to-back billion-dollar Batman movies and like made the superhero genre really hot again with his Dark Knight trilogy. And now they've asked him to produce a Superman movie directed by Zack Snyder, who they know there's going to be lots of spectacle and lots of action, and they're opening it in June. From the men who gave you the Dark Knight trilogy. Like, they were expecting Man of Steel to do $1 billion, and maybe that was unrealistic of them. But they were looking at the market at the time that superhero movies are the hottest thing in the world. We've got the hot hand with Christopher Nolan producing this thing. We're going to put his name and the Dark Knight sort of moniker over all the ad campaigns for Man of Steel. And we're expecting this to be, another huge gargantuan runaway success. And instead, it was, it did okay. It didn't flop by any stretch. It did decent numbers. It did pretty good numbers. But considering it came out in June at the start of the summer blockbuster season, considering there were other films around it that cost much less but made the same or more, Man of Steel's successes at the time didn't feel as successful to them as they wanted. And for better or worse, go ahead.
I was saying, I imagine also, you have to look at the critical reception.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Listen, listen, I don't live or die by Rotten Tomatoes. I kind of actually hate aggregate sites, but just for the point of conversation, yeah. Man of Steel has like a 67% on the tomato meter, where the Batman is sitting at 86%. 20% higher, and even the audience score is higher on Man of Steel. It looked like, I think it was about like 70 something percent. I clicked away already, but the Batman's at an 89% audience score. So you have to look at that too. Yeah, okay, they made the same money, but one has amazing critical reception and one had, unfortunately, not great critical reception. So it's like, when you're dealing with the money we're talking about here, what do you do?
And by the way, it was even lower than that on Rotten Tomatoes. It's 56%. So Man of Steel, and remember, and I always try to tell people how to interpret those numbers, because 56, this isn't like a test where you can either score 100, and if it's under 65, you failed. 56% is just the percentage of critics who give it a thumbs up. And 56% shouldn't be taken as a failure. It means that it's like half and half. Half the people who saw it liked it, half the people who saw it didn't like it. So at best, what you can get from that is that the film kind of had a polarizing response, a split response.
Right.
So when you couple that with the price tag for a Superman series, and with the fact that the box office numbers weren't, astronomical as they had hoped, that's why they were not necessarily blown away by the numbers for Man of Steel. But let's remember, let's not act like they just folded up shop. You know, they did
Right.
continue. We got BVS from Man of Steel's success. So really, the question, or not, the observation to make here isn't like they pulled the cord too soon. They just chose the wrong next path. In my guesstimation, where they went next for Man of Steel kind of hamstrung them. And as we said earlier in the episode, perhaps had they just continued with a Man of Steel 2, you know, we would be having a very different conversation these days about how the DC films turned out, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so Jay, I hope that answers your question there, pal. And the
Thank
next
you.
one, yeah, thank you, Jay. And if anyone else has a question that they want to send over, remember the fanboypodcast@gmail.com. And then the other question comes from Carlos Tavo Borrego. So first of all, he's also on board with the wrestling thing, so that's another reason why that's going to be happening. But this one almost seems more tailor made for you because there was news this week. So he asked, "Are you guys hyped about the Gotham Knight video game? Since now it seems to have a release. When's the release, Brett?"
I don't know, October.
Yes, October.
Yeah, it got pushed. Well, I shouldn't even say it got pushed. I don't think they gave an initial release date yet. So yes, October is going to be the release date. I think it's like later in October. I'm excited for this game. I love the Batman Arkham series. This is not made by Rocksteady. Of course, they are working on Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, but this is WB Games. This might be the studio WB Montreal that did Arkham Origins, if I'm not mistaken, which some people are kind of down on, but I actually really like that game a lot. So yeah, this game, it looks like, you know, the little bit of footage we've seen so far, it looks basically like an Arkham game, but they've made it more of an action RPG. They've added you know, like basically like levels, elements and skill trees. And the cool thing is you have 4 playable characters from the Bat family. In this continuity, Batman is dead, which, like, he's probably not. I'm sure he's unlockable later in the game. But you do have Robin, Nightwing, Batgirl, and Red Hood. And the cool thing is that you also have drop in, drop out co-op up to 2 players. It's not going to be a 4-player squad thing, but it's something that you and I could hop into and play, or, you know, play with a listener or something. I would love to do something like that later on in the year. I'll probably play most of it solo because that's just how I roll. But I'm excited for this game, Tavo. I really can't wait for it. I'm already just planning to play as Nightwing the entire time because I love Nightwing. Yeah, Mario, what about you? Are you pumped for this game?
I'm a little muted because it's not connected to the Arkhamverse. And the fact that it's like, you know, it's its own thing, it's too disconnected from anything I might care about. Like, it's not connected to any books or TV shows or movies I like. Because one of the things that got me into Arkham was like the Paul Dini connection and the fact that it almost seemed like an evolution of the animated series with a new sort of twist on it. And you had Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill. Like, that connective tissue got me to go headfirst into the Arkham games. This Gotham Knights thing, I don't have any particular connection to that group or that IP or that mythology per se. So as a game, I'm not necessarily looking forward to it. But with that said, the co-op element sounds pretty cool. If we can do, you know, if we can fight some crimes using an engine that's kind of like the Arkham engine as other Batverse characters and do missions together in co-op, that sounds like something I would definitely want to check out. But just on its own, like when I heard about it and the concept for it, there's been nothing about this Gotham Knights game that's made me want to pre-order it or pay too much attention.
Yeah. The weird thing that's funny is it's not connected, supposedly not supposed to be connected to the Arkham series.
Yeah.
But spoilers for Arkham Knight, you know, whatever. Like, you had plenty of time to play it. The end of Arkham Knight, if you do like the good ending or like the total ending, Batman you know, goes away or dies supposedly at the end of that. So it's weird that this game, they're like, it's not connected to the Arkham series, but in this game Batman is either dead or missing at the start of it. The only cool thing, though, Mario, that might get you into it, maybe, and we've been talking about this a lot lately because it's been coming up in regards to the Batman movie, is the villain, or at least like a big portion of the villains, is supposed to be the Court of Owls. So we are going to be getting some Court of Owls, Bat family stuff in this, and the Bat family in the comics is very tied up in the Court of Owls storyline.
Yeah.
So that actually could
Okay.
be really cool. I do want to we haven't seen the game in a while since the initial reveal, so it looked beautiful at the time. I'm sure it's going to look fantastic.
You look
They
beautiful,
already
Brett.
have a lot of assets and in place, but I
Dude,
do
your
want a little
assets
more.
are beautiful, Brett.
Thank you. But I do want to see a little more of the gameplay because it did look very Arkham-y, but that it is going the RPG route. I'm wondering how that is gonna go. And so I have a feeling, well, definitely for sure, if we're getting this game in October, there's no doubt we will see it in June at like some of the E3 press conferences and reveals and stuff. So I don't think it'll be that much longer before we start seeing some more of the game and can get a better feel for it.
Bada bing.